Welcome everybody to the KELP office hours for November 7th, 2024. It's nice to see everybody. If you are here to learn a little bit about our KELP assessment, you have come to the right place. If that's not what you intended to be at, you're probably at the wrong webinar, but welcome and thank you for coming out this afternoon. My name is Abe Christ, Bureau Chief in the Performance Office at the CSDE that administers all our assessments, our summative assessments, and this is one of our relatively new assessments. So there's plenty to learn and a lot to communicate to you this afternoon. So I'm going to hand it over to my colleagues, Katie Seifert and Deirdre Ducharme, who are on for the bulk of the presentation. Also, we're joined by another colleague of mine, Kim Johnson from the Performance Office, and then Marie Musumeci, also from Cambium Assessment. So Katie, I'll hand it over to you.
All right, so for today's office hours, all attendees are going to be on mute for the duration of the webinar. However, we will be monitoring and responding to questions in the chat during the meeting and doing those question breaks. So once we have a break, we'll look at what's in the chat, we'll answer those questions. If it is a student-specific question, please email that specifically to us. We do have our contact information at the end of the presentation. And if you email us, please no student names, just SACIDs. The PowerPoint has been posted into the chat. And this session is also being recorded so we can post it onto our CSDE website, Student Assessment Training webpage. So the agenda for today's meeting is listed here for you all. As you can see, there are a lot of different topics that we're going to be covering today during the session. So the first thing we're going to do is really dive into some important dates for KELP. So this year, the KELP assessment window has been moved to be in a closer alignment to our Lost Links assessment window. Please note this updated window is January 13th through March 7th, 2025. To ensure that students are correctly rostered to take the KELP and not the Lost Links assessment, the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form should be completed, which means it's finalized and implemented in CT SEDS by December 20th, 2024. For eligible students, the alternate assessment data will sync to the Test Information Distribution Engine, also known as TIDE, and activate the student's alternate assessment indicator, which will give the students access to the KELP assessment or other appropriate alternate assessments based on that student's grade. In the next few rows, you will see on this chart are important dates and deadlines for the TEA and DA if the student is being considered and is eligible for the Early Stopping Rule, or ESR, which is only intended for a very small number of students who are nonverbal and do not have an established mode of communication. We will go into more depth on the ESR and the student response check in upcoming slides. Finally, you will see the window and deadline for the KELP domain exemptions. Once again, we will be discussing this in greater detail later in the presentation. Please note, any item that has an asterisk is an item that must be submitted in TIDE by the DA. Now that we've gone over the important dates, we are now going to do a quick overview of what the KELP is. So the Connecticut Alternate Assessment of English Language Proficiency, or KELP, is one of Connecticut's assessments within the alternate assessment system. This alternate assessment is designed for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities in grades K through 12 who are dually identified as English learners or multilingual learners, ELMLs, receiving services under IDEA. Students are determined eligible by the Planning and Placement team using the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form embedded within CT SEDS. This assessment is aligned to and derived from the Connecticut English Language Proficiency Standards, or KELP standards, and the English Language Proficiency Standards for English learners with significant cognitive disabilities. This test measures skills in listening, speaking, reading, and writing. Once again, For the 2024-2025 KELP administration, there will be multiple test digital and online forms provided for administration. These forms will be Forms A, B, C, and D. The required training is hosted by the test developers Crest and ELPA 21. Once again, we're going to discuss this in greater detail further in the presentation. So now I'm going to pass this over to my colleague Deirdre Ducharme, who is going to be taking a look at our KELP eligibility.
Great, thank you, Katie, and good afternoon, everyone. As part of the annual planning and placement team process for students in grades K through 12, the PPT should determine which assessments and accessibility features are most appropriate. For students to be eligible for the KELP, PPTs need to ensure the student is eligible as a student needing special education services under the IDEA law. Then the planning and placement team will need to review the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System Eligibility Form section within CT SEDS using the most current evaluations data within 3 years of the current date. This data substantiates or should substantiate a significant cognitive disability and functional adaptive scores that are well below age and grade level expectations. Additionally, there should be evidence within the IEP to support participation criteria. If the student is determined by the PPT to be eligible for the alternate assessment, and the student is also duly identified as a student who is an English learner, multilingual learner in PSIS, they will qualify for the KELP assessment as part of the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System. Students who qualify for services under Section 504 are not eligible for KELP. At the PPT, the team will discuss, review, and complete the alternate assessment system eligibility form within CT SEDS. During the PPT, the team should review the student's current learning profile and evaluations when screening for student eligibility using the embedded eligibility form. The team will need to review and document the following evidence. Number 1, does the student have a presence of an intellectual disability? Team should be using current cognitive assessments supporting that the student has a significant cognitive impairment. This may consist of a composite score below 70. In the absence of standardized cognitive assessment scores, the team should have evidence to substantiate the presence of an intellectual impairment. Number 2, the planning and placement team should determine whether the student has functional adaptive skills that are substantially well below age and grade level. Functional adaptive behavior is defined as those conceptual, social, and practical skills necessary to meet the common demands of everyday life across multiple settings. Results from functional adaptive behavioral assessments should be more than 1.5 standard deviations below the mean score. And finally, number 3, the PPT should determine if the student receives intensive and extensive instructional support services. The student requires extensive, repeated instruction and support that is not of a temporary or transient nature. And the student uses substantially adapted materials and individualized methods of accessing information in alternate ways to acquire, maintain, demonstrate, and transfer skills. The planning and placement team can provide evidence that the student has IEP goals and objectives linked to and derived from the Connecticut Core Standards for Math and English Language Arts and the Next Generation Science Standards, which are the academic standards for our assessments. For students identified as an English learner, multilingual learner, the PPT should provide evidence that the student has IEP goals that support English language development linked to and derived from the Connecticut English Language Proficiency KELP standards. Finally, if the team determines that the student meets all 3 eligibility criteria, they will complete the verification section within the CTSED system that attests that the student meets all 3 eligibility criteria. Please note that all evidence for these composite scores must be numerical. We've also included a link on this slide to the annotated Connecticut Alternate Assessment System eligibility form, which may serve as an aid for planning and placement team discussions. The KELP participation guideline document provides a brief overview of the participation criteria and procedures that teams should consider when determining and documenting eligibility for the KELP and the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System. For English learners with the most significant cognitive disabilities, this resource should be reviewed beginning in pre-K through the transitioning to kindergarten, through grade 12, and those transition services beyond. Additionally, this document discusses participation in relation to the early stopping rule and domain exemptions, which we will be discussing shortly. All alternate assessments are documented through the completion of the eligibility form within the CTSEDS platform, located within the state testing tile. Again, teams should ensure that the alternate assessment eligibility form is completed in entirety, noting current evidence throughout the IEP. Teams need to complete that verification section on the form if the student meets eligibility criteria. The team must also select all grades that are covered by the duration of the IEP to ensure that the student's current grade of enrollment is captured, but also if the student's IEP covers next school year, you want to make sure that that grade is also represented. And the IEP must be finalized and implemented in CTSEDS in order for the alternate assessment data to sync to the TIDE system. When this happens, the alternate assessment indicator will be activated, which gives a student access to the KELP assessment through the test delivery system. And finally, here's an example of what PPTs will review and complete in CTSEDS. So you can see that we have an example of the alternate assessment eligibility form. There's a question that teams will complete yes or no. That question establishes whether the student is being considered to participate in the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System. So if you choose yes, the eligibility form will pop up, and then the team will complete the 3 eligibility criteria. The CSDE will import the alternate assessment eligibility data daily from CTSEDS to TIDE, and as mentioned, for those plans that are fully implemented and for those students that qualify for alternate assessments, the alternate assessment indicator will be activated in TIDE. And I'll also mention that if there is a change in a student's status, so let's say hypothetically it's determined that the student no longer is eligible for an alternate assessment, and when that alternate data syncs to TIDE, the indicator will turn off, indicating that the student will qualify for the standard Lost Links assessment. Now Katie is going to share some information about the early stopping rule.
Thank you, Deirdre. So most students eligible to participate on the alternate assessments will be able to complete these assessments. This is because they can access the test questions and communicate their responses when provided supports and accommodations that mirror those that are provided during their daily instruction. However, a small percentage of students with the most significant cognitive and functional adaptive behavioral needs have no observable ways to communicate responses to participate in both classroom or large-scale assessments. Therefore, the CSDE has developed a method for identifying and determining the eligibility of these students prior to the testing window using a special test code status called the Early Stopping Rule, or ESR. Students that qualify will not take the CTAA, CTAS, or KELP if the student is identified as an ELML. During the assessment window, this is because they are not able to demonstrate an observable mode of communication during the completion of the Student Response Check, or SRC. Instead, the ESR special code status counts these students as test participants with the understanding that they meet the specific eligibility criteria through the ESR identification process. So you may be asking, what is this process to identify students for the early stopping rule? Once again, for this small group of students with these characteristics, their teachers will follow the instructions in the early stopping rule document linked here on this slide to complete the student response check. Just to review again, there are some important dates for administration and deadlines for the submission of the ESR, and they are as follows. The TEA needs to conduct the 3 separate administrations of the student response check. These 3 separate administrations need to occur on 3 separate days during 3 separate timeframes. And this should occur between December 2nd and January 3rd, 2025. The TEA, if the student meets eligibility on the student response checks, needs to complete the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System Early Stopping Rule Request and Attestation form and provide that to their DA prior to January 3rd, 2025. The DA will then submit the Connecticut Alternate Assessment Early Stopping Rule Request and Attestation form in the TIDE system by the close of business on January 13th, 2025. Please note, late submissions may be denied. For students taking the KELP, educators will want to ensure they are completing the ESR process prior to the start of the testing window. Once these steps are completed, the CSDE will review and process the ESR requests. Upon approval, an ESR designation will be reflected on a student's TIDE dashboard. Our test vendor, CAI, will close out the student's tests since the students will not be taking this assessment. DAs may want to review the supporting document, how to submit the Early Stopping Rule ESR request and attestation form in TIDE for district administrators prior to entering the ESR submission in TIDE. Additionally, we provided here some important tips for before submitting. One of the ones that you really want to make sure is that the alternate assessment indicator is on in TIDE. Make sure the student SACID matches on all forms and is accurate. Make sure the attestation that is uploaded is on the 2425 form. Make sure the dates are accurate and all signatures are completed on or after the completion of the SRC. If there's a late arrival or late determination of eligibility, please contact the CSDE prior to submitting the ESR. So how will you know if the ESR has been approved? So you will know if and when your ESR form is approved, as the DA and TIDE will receive an email letting them know that the form has been approved. The DA will also receive an email if your form is rejected or needs additional information. Actually, I'm going to go back here to one thing. The other thing is that you're going to see on this slide is that if your student is updated for and is approved for the ESR, you're going to see in the student's TIDE dashboard a ESR flag showing that approval. We update these on a nightly basis, so if they are approved, you will be able to see this indicator within their TIDE dashboard. Once they're approved, you do not need to take any further action. TEAs should not log into the student interface or administer even open a test. Any test for the student, if you do that, then we will have to submit an appeal in TIDE to have that form reset. Cambian staff are responsible for closing out all eligible tests for an approved ESR students. And I'm now going to pass this over to our colleague, Marie from Cambian, and she is going to talk about what that looks like in the TIDE system if the ESR is approved.
A test is closed out by someone at CAI, you will see, for example, under the TA name that the test has been completed by, here we see me, Marie Musumeci. So please do not worry if you see someone's name pop up there, because that just means that we have actually completed the test on behalf of that student.
Thanks, Marie. So now now that we've talked about ESR, we're now going to talk about KELP domain exemptions. So once again, a small number of students with the most significant cognitive disabilities may be unable to participate in either the listening or speaking domains of the KELP because of the complexities of their disability. Domain exemptions are available on the listening and/or speaking subtests for the following students. For the listening domain, these are students who are identified as deaf or hard of hearing and may not be able to participate in the listening subtest due to their disability. On the speaking domain, these are students who are nonverbal, and even when provided assistive or augmentative and alternative communication supports, may not be able to participate in the speaking subtest. If a student isn't being considered for an ESR or did not qualify for an ESR, teams may consider a domain exemption if the student meets the criteria mentioned in the previous slide. Domain exemptions are submitted by the DA and TIDE between December 2nd, 2024 through February 28th, 2025. Please note that submissions after February 28th, 2025 will not be accepted for processing, as the tests need to be closed prior to the close of the test window. Please ensure that the student has, Please ensure that the student has the alternate assessment indicator turned on in TIDE before submitting a domain exemption. Also ensure that the form is submitted prior to testing the student and communicate this information and expectations clearly to all test administrators. The DA and TIDE will be able to submit this KELP domain exemption form within the TIDE system. The KELP student domain exemption form can be located by navigating to TIDE, preparing for testing, and then selecting the form's drop-down menu. Some tips for submission. Once again, check that the alt flag is turned on to yes, and also that the EL indicator is turned on in TIDE. For more information on KELP domain exemptions and how to submit a KELP domain exemption, please visit the KELP resources page. So I'm going to pass it over once again to our colleague Marie, and she's going to share with us how this looks within the TIDE system.
So once a student is approved for a specific domain exemption, in TIDE, you will see under the KELP assessment, either speaking or listening, and or if they qualify for both listening and speaking. And this then means that when you go to administer the other domains of the KELP test, you will not see listening and or speaking.
Thanks, Marie. So now we're going to talk about some KELP training. So training is required annually for KELP. Educators administering the alternate, or TEAs, are critical components to the annual administration. This annual training provides current information on system enhancements and changes and helps to ensure that student results and associated interpretations are valid and reliable. It is recommended that ELACs, Special Education Central Office staff, and DAs set up a process to ensure training is completed and procedures within their district are communicated to staff. There is a separate overview available to ELACs, Special Education Administrators, and DAs also within the ELPA 21 training site. Districts, under the guidance and direction of the Performance Office, should ensure compliance with training. District policies and procedures relating to KELP administration and training should be communicated out. Once the TEA has completed the training at ELPA 21, a certificate is available that can be downloaded and printed from the training site. This should be maintained locally through the process determined by your district. The CSDE does not provide these certifications. However, they can request training certification and verification from districts. We're now going to walk you briefly through the process to access the KELP training on the ELPA 21 platform. It should be noted that when you're completing this training through ELPA 21, that once again, this is provided by CREST and ELPA 21, and the training from them may vary from some Connecticut specific policies. Therefore, educators should review and be familiar with all KELP specific guidelines and manuals prior to test administration. So CREST, we heard this week that CREST has shared that they anticipate this training will be available in early December, and we'll be posting this an announcement on the Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Program portal page once this training goes live. So some things that you want to be aware of when you're going to go to your the KELP training at ELPA 21 is that you're going to go to ELPA 21. We have this linked right here for you. They will ask if you are a new user to provide a district verification code. Your district verification code is ELPA 21, all lowercase. Please note that also if you are a new user, you can click on this resource here that is hyperlinked into the training session that walks new users through registration and where you would find your Alt-ELPA training resources. If you're a returning user, we also have a document here. So if you're a returning user, how to log back in, if you've forgotten your password, how to re-access your password, and also how to find the different trainings within their websites. Some things that we want you to be aware of and have available with you on review are the KELP Accessibility and Accommodations Manual, because that is Connecticut specific, as well as the KELP Test Administration Manual, and especially the Connecticut Alternate Assessment System Early Stopping Rule, as these are Connecticut specific documents and information. We also have linked here for you our CSDE training sessions and where all of our KELP office hours that we record are posted. So now that we've gone through that, we've gone through the training, it's now time to start preparing for the summative test administration. So when you're preparing for the summative assessment, you may be wondering who is going to be administering the KELP. Educators who are designated to administer the KELP are educators determined by your district. The KELP may be administered only by educators who have that TEA designation and have completed the KELP module Alt-ELPA test administration training for the 24-25 school year. If you do not have the user role of TEA and TIDE, please contact your DA prior to summative testing window so they can assign you with that correct user role. For educators administering only the KELP, it is not necessary to participate in the academic alternate assessment training for the CTA and CTAS if your student is only taking the KELP assessment. Educators who are going to be administering the KELP should be familiar with the student through regular instruction, their peripherals or assistive technology, and other service areas such as English language development, and should have completed the KELP Alt-ELPA training. Districts may determine the educator designated to administer the KELP as either an educator or administrator supporting ELs and MLs, an educator who is a special education educator or staff, or both educators or administrators supporting EL, ML, and special education educators. So district administrators, ELACs, and TEAs will want to be aware of the following when preparing for the summative KELP assessment. In each district, guidance on who administers the KELP should be developed based on the guidelines that the CSDE has suggested. Additionally, if applicable, the district should complete the early stopping rule and submission prior to administering and prior to the CSDE deadline. Additionally, if applicable, complete and submit the domain exemption prior to administering and our CSDE guidelines. The DA and TIDE should designate that educator as a TEA and TIDE so they can access the secure test materials and administer the KELP assessment. DAs, ELACs, and TEAs should review and confirm eligibility of students for KELP and CT SEDS and confirm their status in TIDE. Only students with a finalized and implemented IEP with the completed alternate assessment eligibility form, and CT SEDS will have that alternate assessment indicator activated and tied. We are, like we said before, we're currently doing that nightly sync Monday through Friday. Educators should create a schedule additionally for practice tests as well as for the summative assessment. As TEers prepare to administer the summative KELP, they should ensure that all materials are, including the following, are set and ready to go for day of testing. So 2 devices for administration, that the student device has the updated secure browser installed, and we also included here, just as a reference, the technology resources guide, and the AAC devices are set up prior to administering. Additionally, the designated TEA will need to complete the following prior to administration of the summative assessments. So like we said again, complete that annual training prior to administering, administer practice tests prior to the summative assessments. This is to ensure familiarity with the platform for both you, the TEA, and the student. Additionally, administering the practice tests will help with any AT and ensuring that your AT is set up accurately and it has smooth administration, and the student is familiar with how to use that AT during the summative assessment. And then we've also listed here, once again for you, that you would review the following documents listed here prior to testing to ensure accuracy of administration. So now I'm going to pass it over to my colleague Deirdre to start going over the practice tests.
Thanks, Katie. As Katie mentioned, it is important to practice the KELP prior to the summative test administration. This helps not only the test administrator, but also the student understand the test format and how the various accessibility tools work. To administer the KELP practice test, the TEA will want to log on to the portal to access the KELP resource page. There they can download and print the practice test administrator directions and scoring rubric booklets. And these booklets are available by grade or grade band. So we're going to show you on this slide what those steps look like, and then Katie and I are going to walk you through the process. So on the slide, we've indicated the steps for how to access the practice test. And for those of you that are familiar with KELP or have administered Smarter Balance, NGSS, or alternate assessments, this process certainly would apply to those practice tests as well. So essentially, you're going to log on to the Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Program portal as indicated by number 1 on your slide. Then for number 2, you're going to select the practice and training tests. And then you have the option of signing on as a guest user. There's a toggle button. So signing on as a guest user is something available to any administrator. Parents and guardians can try this at home as well. So you don't need any kind of authentication to access these tests. Should you want to trial a practice test with a student using their first name and SACID, then you can just toggle off the guest user and then sign the student in. As indicated by step 4, there's a drop-down menu. And so from that, you can choose grades K through 12, depending on the grade that your student is in. And then once you've selected the appropriate grade, step 5 indicates that you'll have access to viewing any of the 4 domain-specific KELP assessments. So whether that's listening, speaking, reading, or writing. And then for the purpose of this training, we're going to walk you through what a practice test might look like for a kindergartner taking the reading assessment. So what I'm going to do is share my screen. Just take me one moment.
And as Deirdre's doing that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pop into the chat the practice test booklet for K. So you can see that, you can open that link up and see as we're going along what that looks like for the practice test booklet.
Okay. So, and I think that what Katie just mentioned is really important. Before you do any sort of simulation of the KELP practice test, you want to make sure that you have those directions for test administration, so the DFA, and you want to make sure that you have those scoring rubrics available. So right now, as you can tell from my computer, we are at the Connecticut Comprehensive Assessment Program portal, and in the section categorized as Browse by Assessment, you'll see that we have an alternate assessment system card. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to point out briefly that if you are interested in accessing KELP resources, under the associated resource section, you'll see that we have a KELP resource page. I love this page. It has everything you need to know about the KELP. And so, as Katie mentioned, this is where you would access those grade-specific test administrator directions and scoring rubric booklets.
And those are
Okay.
for the practice test only, just so you're aware.
Thank you. And so certainly when we have specific guidance as far as where those trained TEAs will access the materials in TIDE prior to test day. So those would be the secure test directions. But anyway, what we're going to do is we're going to go back to this main alternate assessment system page, and I'm going to choose the practice test and training test. And this is exactly what you saw just a moment ago on our slide. I'm essentially going to be toggling as the guest user, so I'm going to select sign in, and I'm going to choose grade K, and I'm also going to make my screen a little bit bigger so we can actually see what we have on the screen. So we have kindergarten selected. I'm going to choose the KELP practice test. And I'm just going to point out that the option below KELP, this is for the Connecticut alternate assessment. So if you wanted to trial the CTAA math or ELA, your teachers can log onto this option. But for demonstration purposes, we're going to choose KELP. Again, this brings us back to this test menu. I'm going to choose the reading practice test. And like all of our practice tests, interims, summative, etc., the first thing that the teacher is going to see on their screen is a list of the accessibility features. And for students that qualify for alternate assessments, accommodation and accessibility features are automatically turned on for those students. So you'll see, as indicated by the on buttons on my slide, we have a host of features that are automatically available to our students and the teachers that are supporting their access to the alternate assessment. Now, certainly, if these tools and accessibility features are not applicable or not appropriate for the student, then certainly they don't need to be activated. You don't have to do anything with them. So at this point, I am going to select this button so that I can navigate into the assessment, and all tests will require a functionality check. So at this point, we're going to verify that the audio and video works. And so I'm going to choose this option here so that I can listen to the sound. If you don't hear the sound, then you'll follow the prompt. I didn't hear the sound. And because I heard the sound, I'm going to click this option, which brings me to the final instruction page before moving on to the practice test. So again, this is standardized language available for all of our practice tests and summative tests. It gives the teacher additional information about, and the student for that matter, because students will see this on their secure browser. It just gives some general information about the test settings and how to proceed when taking the test. So I'm going to begin the test now. And before Katie goes through the prompts that are indicated by the DFAs, I'm just going to point out some of the tools on this slide. So on this screen. So you'll see that we have a split screen, and this is the setup for all of our assessments. And you have the ability to create a linear presentation of the information. So by toggling over this arrow, I can expand my reading passage so I have full access to the screen. And students that are able to navigate and use these features independently, that's something that you'll want to show them how to do when they're taking a practice test. Otherwise, if students are dependent on their teacher for assistance, the teacher is going to navigate for the student. I'm also going to point out that this icon here, which applies to a reading passage, there's one over here on the item response portion of the screen. This is called a task model, and when you hover over that, there are a variety of options that are available to the teacher and or the student. So for instance, if you're someone who uses a notepad, or if the student benefits from having the teacher take notes for them, that's an option. We have a strike through, which is a test taking strategy maybe utilized for students that are equipped to use this particular skill or this particular strategy. And then we also have highlighters available. So again, these features are turned on through the task model. And Katie is going to use the DFA to show what this might look like if you were conducting a practice test with a kindergartner.
Okay, so Deirdre, I'm just going to take control real quick and share just so they can see briefly what that looks like. So when you're seeing the KELP practice tests, I've gone to the KELP reading practice test. You're going to see here what is in bold is what you're going to be reading. If you see something that is in parentheses and it is in italics, it indicates what you're going to be doing as you're going through the practice tests. So it says, indicate the graphics and read the text. So you're not going to read this to the student. That's a prompt for what you're going to be doing as you read. Additionally, you may see something in the practice test booklet and in the directions for secure administration where it is in brackets. And once again, you're not going to read this, specifically, but you're going to sit there and it's going to give you directions on if you have a student with a visual impairment, you're going to read, and then what's in parentheses, that's what you would read for that. So I'm just wanted to share that with you real quick. And I'm going to pass the screen back over to Deirdre so she can show that to you, because I wanted to give you, so if you weren't able to open that document up, you could see how this goes. So as if we're on number 1 in the practice test, it's going to be, we are going to read about trees. Then you will answer some questions. Apples grow on trees. Apples are food. We eat apples. Listen as I read. Apples are food. Which picture shows an apple? A, B, C.
And then you can move on to the next item and follow the appropriate script as indicated in the DFA. And then once you've completed those sample items, the student will see the congratulations page. This essentially indicates that you've reached the end of the test. The students have an opportunity to go back and review their items if they like. And if they're satisfied with their responses, they will submit the test. And again, this mirrors the process that all of our practice tests are designed to essentially simulate what students will see when they're taking the live assessment. So now we're going to go back to the presentation. Katie has some closing information and resources to share with you.
Okay. So just once again, with our alternate, the KELP assessment, is that please be aware of, and this is in our test administration manual, the Connecticut specific policies. In Connecticut, we allow that all grades, the TEA reads aloud and scribes items for that student. So please be aware of that. Please ensure that you're looking at these Connecticut specific policies. So as a TEA administering the KELP, you will want to have read this document, which is the KELP Test Administration Manual, prior to administration. This document contains the directions to guide the test administrator in test security, administration, accessing those secure materials, which we're going to get into real soon, how to log in for both the practice test and in the summative assessment, administering those practice tests that we just went over, as well as the general test administration activities. The TEA will need this along with the secure directions for test administration for the summative assessment. Additionally, this is the KELP Accessibility and Accommodation Manual. In this manual, educators will find the guidance on the provision of optimal testing conditions and the selection and administration of appropriate universal features, designated supports, and accommodations for eligible ELMLs with the most significant cognitive disabilities that are eligible to take this assessment. Once again, I can't stress this enough. Please note that the Connecticut policy provides that the TEA administering this assessment reads aloud all items and stimuli to the student based on the directions and the secure directions for test administration. The responsibilities and suggested steps for participation and administration and after test activities for the trained TEA are defined in this document and is a helpful resource for our teams. So now we're going to get into KELP administration, and I'm going to pass this over to our colleague Marie.
Thank you, Katie. So to begin, the KELP directions for test administration, or DFAs, are secure testing materials that are required for KELP administration, and they may be accessed only by users with a TEA or DA role in the test information distribution engine or TIDE. So to reiterate, these are secure materials, and DAs and TEAs need to ensure the test security at all times. Please review the KELP TAM for directions on accessing secure materials prior to administration. Now, for KELP administration, TEAs need to ensure that they download the correct grade level and domain DFA, and then you will navigate to the appropriate form, either form A, B, C, or D. But you will not know the form type needed until the very beginning of a student's test. There's more information on test forms in the KELP TAM, and upon completion of testing, the TEA needs to follow CSDE policies for the secure removal of downloaded materials, the DFAs, from all devices. So here you can see this is a breakdown of what it will look like when accessing the KELP secure materials. You will log into TIDE, navigate to the Secure File Center, and look for the appropriate grade banded zip file. Please note that only those with TEA or DA roles in TIDE will have access to these files. When you download and open the grade-specific file, you'll find the DFAs for all 4 KELP domains. That's listening, speaking, reading, and writing, which then contain all 4 forms A, B, C, and D. So as stated before, you will not know which form the student has been assigned until you actually begin the test on the student's device. This means you must follow the same login procedure to both administer and to take a secure assessment. Once a test is chosen, again, listening, speaking, reading, or writing, and the student is approved to take the test and actually begins the test on the student's device by clicking Begin Test Now, only then will you see what form, A, B, C, or D, you need. So as stated before, all DFAs for each grade and testing domain contain all 4 forms. So for example, this means that the grade 1 listening DFA PDF includes directions for forms A, B, C, and D. Now, once you know which form you need after you begin the test on the student's device, you can then navigate to the appropriate form within the correct grade level and test domain DFA.
So per the KELP TAM, TEA should administer the KELP domains in the following order: listening first, then reading, then speaking, and finally writing. So we have lots of KELP resources available to help you and your teams with KELP administration. Here are some of the resources we have available, and we continue to develop additional resources as we see that we have the need for. You will see these resources on the CSDE KELP main page and on the CAI KELP resources page. We are always here to help and support you with any questions that you have. So we have our contact from the performance office listed here on the left-hand side. And also we have our partners from the Connecticut Help Desk or Cambian Assessments. Here on the other side of the document, please reach out to us with any questions that you may have. We're here to support you. And we would like to thank you for taking the time today to attend this training. We appreciate everything that you do for our students, and we wish that you have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much for attending.